Alcatraz, perched in the cold waters of San Francisco Bay, a fortress designed to hold America's most dangerous criminals. Isolation on all sides, razor-sharp rules, guards with eyes everywhere. Escape was nearly impossible, and survival depended on more than strength. It depended on understanding the invisible rules of fear and respect. By 1959, Bumpy Johnson had been on the rock for 6 years. A former Harlem crime boss who had built a fortune, survived decades of gang wars, and walked through life with a quiet authority. At 54 years old, he carried himself with calm confidence, never reckless, never loud, but always aware of every move, every threat, every opportunity. In the eyes of other inmates, Bumpy represented more than himself. He was a symbol of power, intelligence, and strategy. Black prisoners looked to him for protection, for guidance, for courage. Even white inmates, hardened by violence and criminal ambition, understood not to underestimate him. His reputation preceded him in every hallway, every cell block, every whispered conversation. He had survived Harlem's streets and the violent world of organized crime. Yet Alcatraz was different. Here, survival demanded a new kind of patience, a new kind of cunning. And Bumpy was ready, even if others didn't realize it yet. The stage was set for a confrontation that would become legendary. Eric Polson, 6'4", 275 pounds of muscle honed from years of prison weightlifting, a man whose reputation was built on fear, intimidation, and violence. He had already killed 3 black men in Texas and showed no remorse. To him, life outside Alcatraz had been proof that size and cruelty were all that mattered. Polson's mindset was simple: dominate or destroy. Racial hatred fueled every action, every insult, every shove. He believed the rules of Alcatraz didn't apply to him. He was untouchable, a giant among men who had learned to survive by crushing anyone weaker than himself. And for weeks, he had terrorized black inmates quietly, methodically, without crossing the line that would land him in the hole. Some guards turned a blind eye, others quietly approved. Polson's intimidation was convenient for those who shared his racist views. He walked a thin line of aggression that the prison tolerated because it kept the black prisoners in check, and Polson knew it. He thrived on that unspoken complicity. But there was one man who refused to bow. Bumpy Johnson, older, smaller, but far smarter than Polson could imagine. And Polson despised him, the respect Bumpy commanded, from black inmates and even whites alike. It gnawed at Polson's ego, challenged everything he believed about power and dominance. He wanted to humiliate Bumpy publicly, to prove that size and violence were all that mattered. The week began with a simple act of arrogance. In the cafeteria, Polson strode past Bumpy's table without hesitation, his eyes locked on the older man, his pride demanding attention. Then, in full view of everyone, he reached down and took Bumpy's dessert, a small slice of apple pie, the kind of humiliation designed to provoke a reaction. Bumpy looked at the empty spot where his dessert had been, glanced at Polson eating it, and then returned to his own meal. Not a word, not a gesture, not a sign of anger. Around the table, other inmates bristled, ready to leap to Bumpy's defense, but he shook his head slightly, signaling calm. To them, it looked like weakness, like fear. But those who truly understood Bumpy saw something different, a calculated patience, a plan unfolding silently. He was letting Polson think he could humiliate him without consequence, letting the bully overplay his hand before the reckoning came. The next day, the showers became Polson's stage. Water dripping off Bumpy's body as he showered, Polson shoved him hard enough to make him slip against the wet floor. Words were spat like venom, racial insults loud enough for everyone to hear. Younger inmates whispered doubts, thinking Bumpy lacked the courage to respond. But the older men recognized strategy. Bumpy didn't retaliate because he didn't need to. The bully had grown bold, careless, overconfident. Then came the yard confrontation. Outdoor recreation, a place meant for walking, stretching, small freedom. Polson deliberately stepped in Bumpy's path, blocking him, smirking, using racial slurs to assert dominance. Bumpy stepped around him without comment. No outburst, no attack, just calm, measured avoidance. And still, whispers spread through the yard. Some feared Bumpy, some doubted him, others sensed the tension building towards something inevitable. By midweek, every inmate on the rock was talking about the escalating confrontations. Bumpy appeared patient, even weak. but those who understood prison politics knew the truth. Polson was walking on a rope he didn't see, blind to the trap that had been set around him. Every shove, every insult, every theft had been recorded in the quiet ledger of Bumpy's mind, and the moment to strike was coming. The breaking point came quietly. Not at Bumpy's table, not in the showers, but in the yard with someone smaller, weaker, defenseless. Robert Jackson, just 23, sitting alone, reading a book. Polson saw an easy target, a chance to assert his dominance in front of everyone. He snatched the book, mocked him, then struck him across the face with it. A vicious blow that sent Jackson tumbling to the ground. Blood and fear painted his expression as the bully laughed openly. Guards intervened, but only enough to stop the immediate attack. Polson received a minor reprimand, a day of lost recreation and nothing more. The message was clear. Violence was tolerated if it served his twisted sense of racial superiority. Bumpy watched from a distance, his calm face hiding a mind calculating the final move. He had endured weeks of harassment, studied every action, measured every threat, and he knew what had to be done. That evening, in the quiet of the cell block, Bumpy spoke to a few trusted inmates. His voice low, deliberate, carrying the weight of certainty. "Tomorrow, this ends," he said. No anger, no shouting, just a promise that cut deeper than any insult. Those who heard it understood the meaning immediately. Something monumental was about to happen, and the bully would not escape the consequences. Polson believed he was untouchable, strong, violent, feared. But he had miscalculated entirely. He had underestimated patience, intelligence, and the ability to strike with precision when the time was right. Bumpy had let him grow confident, bold, careless, and tomorrow, the scales of power would finally tip. The cafeteria at Alcatraz was a place of rigid order, 250 inmates seated in rows, trays clattering, guards stationed at every corner, eyes scanning constantly. Meals were silent, structured, a fragile rhythm that kept chaos at bay. But that Friday, the rhythm would shatter, because Polson had made a choice. He would confront Bumpy publicly, loudly, and without hesitation. He didn't go to his assigned table. He walked directly to Bumpy's, the force in his stride announcing every ounce of pride and arrogance he carried. He sat down across from Bumpy, tray set with deliberate slamming motion, the sound echoing through the hall like a challenge. He smiled, mocking, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, using racial slurs and insults designed to provoke a reaction. Polson didn't stop there. His eyes darted across the room to Robert Jackson, still nursing the bruises from yesterday. "How's your face feeling, boy?" he shouted, drawing the attention of the cafeteria like a predator circling its prey. The small inmate shrank in his seat, frozen with fear, while other black inmates instinctively rose to defend him, restrained only by shouting guards. Silence fell over the rest of the room, tension thick enough to choke, every movement, every glance, every breath measured. The cafeteria became a stage, and Bumpy Johnson was at the center, calm, silent, watching, waiting. The bully believed he controlled the moment, but he had no idea what was coming. The guards were alert but unaware, ready for minor scuffles, routine compliance, but they could not see the storm that had been brewing for a week. The trap was set, the bully confident, and the quietest, oldest man in the room was about to rewrite the rules entirely. The moment was seconds away. Bumpy Johnson stood slowly from his seat, calm and deliberate, every eye in the cafeteria drawn to the older man. Polson leaned back, expecting hesitation, expecting fear. But all he saw was controlled determination, a quiet that promised consequences far greater than insults or shoves. In one smooth motion, Bumpy revealed what had been hidden against his body, a tool, simple but lethal in the hands of someone who knew exactly how to use it. The movement was so fast, so precise, that most witnesses barely registered it happening. Seconds stretched like minutes as tension reached its peak. He moved toward Polson with purpose, covering the 8 feet between them with astonishing speed, deliberate but unstoppable. Polson started to rise, fists ready, thinking he could fight back, thinking he had control. But Bumpy was faster, sharper, and completely in command of the moment. 2 lightning-fast strikes, executed with surgical precision, landed before anyone could react. The first stopped Polson in his tracks. The second ended the confrontation completely. A single decisive lesson in control, patience, and the consequences of arrogance. The bully who had terrorized weeks of black inmates now lay defeated in shock and pain. Chaos erupted instantly. Guards whistling, shouting, rushing toward the scene. Inmates ducked under tables, scattered, frozen in disbelief at what had just unfolded. Bumpy dropped the weapon, hands raised, calm still intact, letting the authorities take over without resistance. The cafeteria had transformed from a place of routine into a theater of legend in seconds. Bumpy dropped the weapon onto the cafeteria floor with a quiet finality. His hands rose slowly, showing he was no longer armed. Calm, collected, completely in control even as guards swarmed around him. The violence had ended, but the message was just beginning. He leaned slightly toward Polson, whose shock and pain still held him frozen, and spoke clearly, slowly, every word weighted with authority. "Touch that young brother again, and next time you won't see a doctor, you'll see God." The words echoed through the cafeteria, carried by fear, respect, and undeniable truth. A hush fell over every inmate, every guard, every witness. Silence thicker than the tension that had built for a week. The power had shifted instantly. No one doubted who held control now. Bumpy Johnson, older, smaller, quiet, had just rewritten the rules of survival on Alcatraz. The legend was born in a single sentence. Polson survived the attack, but the consequences were permanent. His face bore the scars of a lesson he would never forget, and one eye was lost forever. The bully who had once terrorized black inmates now faced a reality he could not dominate with size or aggression alone. The psychological impact was even deeper than the physical damage. The arrogance that had defined him for years crumbled under the realization that strength alone was meaningless against intelligence, patience, and precision. Fear replaced his cruelty, and he never again harassed a black inmate in Alcatraz. Prison officials, forced to recognize the truth of what had happened, quietly transferred Polson to another facility once he recovered. The act of violence had been extreme, but it had delivered justice where the guards and rules had failed. Bumpy's strategy had not only defended himself but also protected others. Inmates across the rock took notice immediately. The lesson was clear. Respect was earned through brains and courage, not just brawn. And those who had doubted Bumpy's patience or intelligence now understood the power he carried, even in a place designed to break men. The aftermath drew the attention of prison authorities, who quickly launched an investigation into the cafeteria incident. Dozens of witnesses were interviewed, all telling the same story. Polson had been harassing black inmates for weeks, escalating from petty intimidation to outright physical assaults. Bumpy's actions, though violent, were clearly provoked and measured against a sustained pattern of abuse. Investigators also had to confront the uncomfortable truth. Guards had failed in their duty. Polson's minor punishments for prior assaults showed negligence or perhaps silent approval in allowing him to terrorize inmates without consequence. The system had turned a blind eye, and Bumpy had exposed that failure in the most undeniable way possible. In the end, Bumpy was punished, but not harshly. 30 days in solitary for possession of a weapon and assault satisfied the rules, but no additional years were added to his sentence. It was a quiet acknowledgement that the real problem had been Polson, not Johnson. The authorities had little choice but to concede, at least internally, that justice had been served by the older, smarter, more strategic man. The moral resolution was clear to those who watched. Sometimes courage and intelligence enforce justice where rules and regulations fail. Bumpy Johnson had not only defended himself, he had delivered a lesson that the prison system had been unwilling or unable to provide on its own. The story of what Bumpy Johnson did in the Alcatraz cafeteria didn't stay confined to the Rock. It traveled with inmates transferred to other federal prisons, whispered in cell blocks, shared during work details, and recounted to newcomers with awe and respect. The tale grew with each retelling until it became a cautionary legend across the prison system. Bumpy's actions became a symbol of more than just raw violence. They represented strategic patience, the intelligence to wait for the perfect moment, and the courage to act decisively when injustice could no longer be tolerated. Size and strength mattered little compared to brains, timing, and willpower. For black inmates, Bumpy's story became especially powerful. It was proof that one man could stand up to racism in a place designed to break the weak, and that injustice could be confronted and ended with courage and careful planning. Bumpy wasn't just feared anymore. He was respected, admired, and mythologized. By the time he returned to general population after solitary confinement, Bumpy's status had become almost legendary. Younger inmates treated him with reverence, white inmates kept their distance, and guards, even if quietly, acknowledged that he had reshaped the social order in the prison. His reputation was no longer just a reflection of his past in Harlem. It had been cemented in blood, strategy, and legend on the rock itself. The story of Bumpy Johnson at Alcatraz isn't about glorifying violence. It's about the way intelligence, patience, and courage can restore balance when hatred goes unchecked. Violence wasn't his first choice. It was the last resort after a week of relentless harassment and systemic failure. The lesson is clear. When others fail to protect justice, sometimes it falls to the one willing to act strategically and decisively. Bumpy's actions proved that brains could outmatch brawn, that age and experience could overcome size and brute strength. Respect isn't given automatically. It's earned through deeds that demonstrate integrity, courage, and the willingness to defend what's right. Polson's arrogance collapsed under the weight of that lesson, leaving fear and humility in its place. For the inmates who witnessed it, and for those who later heard the story, the Alcatraz cafeteria incident became a blueprint for understanding power and justice in a brutal world. It showed that bullies, no matter how large or violent, can be contained, confronted, and defeated when strategy and intelligence lead the way. And so, the legend endures, whispered in cell blocks, passed from inmate to inmate, remembered in the annals of prison history. At Alcatraz, fear ruled most men, but respect ruled Bumpy Johnson, and that respect, earned through patience, precision, and principle, became his greatest weapon of all.